Hey guys, so we left off where we created this table called people using phpMyAdmin, and we have two records in there that we inserted. What we're going to do now is we're going to first create an index.php file and then add some code to help us to connect to MySQL first, and once we've done that, then we're going to change the code to actually connect to the database called C9 and access records from that table that we created. So let's go ahead and get started. So here in the terminal, if this gets too messy for you, you can always type clear and it will push everything up to the top. So it doesn't erase everything, it's all still there. You can scroll up to it, but it just pushes this up to the top and makes it look a little cleaner for us. Yeah, so we're going to issue the one more thing too. If you don't see this bash window, or when you start to type nothing happens, just hit the X and close that window out and go up to Window and then New Terminal. And that will create a new terminal for you. Oh, we don't want it up here though, we want it down here, so you can click and drag it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to issue a touch command and we're going to create index.php. Now this file's not index.html because we want it to be interpreted by the PHP interpreter running on Apache. So we want to give it a last name of .php, so when the file is requested, the server knows what to do with it, which is process it instead of just serve it out. Cool. So here's our index.php and our files on the left. Now I can double click that to open it up. And I'm going to go ahead and add my code in here. First thing I'm going to do is identify this code as PHP code. So I'm going to use the opening PHP tag. And we're going to set some variables. The first variable is server name, and we're going to set that equal to localhost, and that's a complete statement. So we end up with a semicolon. Localhost just means that the database server is running on the same computer at the same IP address as our Apache server. So it doesn't have to reach out across the internet to find something else. If you did have to do that, then you would put an IP address and there would be like 136.25.178.32 or something like that. Alright, so server name, and then we're going to set username, and that's going to be equal to your username. You can see your username, right, Ja. You can also scroll up. Well, now I can't because I closed that window out, so all that history went away. But this is your username right here. And so I'm going to type that in. All right, complete statement, so I end it with a semicolon. And then finally I'm going to provide a password. Now the password in our case is empty, so it's just two double quotes back to back, semicolon to complete it. Now all we're doing here is we're setting variables. I could call this Bob, George, and Jesus if I wanted to, and as long as I use these variable names in the right place in the next code, it doesn't matter. PHP doesn't care what you call these variable names. What matters is how they are used in the functions that we're going to be providing this information to. So as parameters, the name is irrelevant, but we call it something that is related to what it contains, so we know what this variable means. When you start writing really massive programs, having a variable name that describes its contents is going to be super helpful, as opposed to having variable A1, A2, A3, A4, or AA, AB, AC, which would be an absolute nightmare. All right, so create connection. So I'm putting a comment here, and I'm going to define a new variable, and this variable is going to become an object. These are not objects, these are just variables that contain a static value. When I use the new command and an existing object, I create a copy or a new instance of this object right here. This is a kind of think of it like a template object. And I'm creating an inside connection. So now all of the methods and properties of this object I can access through this variable right here. Well, because this is an object, it has the ability to accept parameters. And so we're going to give it some initial parameters. And they are set in order: server name, username, password, and database. And the database is optional, but right now we're going to leave it off this first trial run. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to provide the server name, and that just happens to be a variable called server name. And then we're going to provide the username. And then finally password. Now I could have just come in here instead of server name, and I could have just said local host, and I could have put 0 mile here and then empty quotes here. The reason we don't want to do that is we want to make our code as portable as possible. So if we happen to move this code to another server, you're going to use this MySQLi connection probably a couple different places. You're only going to instantiate these variables once, however. You may have multiple connections that will use the same server name, username, and password. So it's good to set them once and not have to worry about it deep in your code somewhere else. So if we hard-coded the values of those parameters in here, then we would have to change them wherever else we were doing a new MySQLi. So that's just food for thought there. That's why we use variable names. So that's a complete statement on its own right there. So $con, or the con variable, CONN, now is an object that contains methods and properties. So let's go ahead and let's check that connection. So I'm going to say if con. Now in JavaScript, I can access a method or a function within an object by just hitting the dot, and then I could do something like this. But this is PHP. The dot has a different meaning. So in order to access a method or property of an object, we have to use what's called a pointer. A pointer looks like this: dash greater than sign. And then we can access the connect error property. So if connect error exists inside of string connection, that means as soon as this happens, we are executing that connection. And if there's an error during this connection, inside of CONN variable or CONN object, a value for connect error will be set. And if there's no error, then connect error will exist, but it won't have any value. So this will return true. But if there is a connection error, it will return. I'm sorry. If I just talked myself into a box there. If there is no connection error, this will return false. But if there is a connection error, this will return true. So if it does return true, we have to give it some code to execute here. And we're going to tell it, okay, if there's a connection error, die. Don't do anything more. So this function right here, die, kills your PHP. It bails out of the PHP interpreter, and whatever happens to be in the HTML stream at the time ends right there, and whatever has been output to the user's HTML file, it just ends right there. So if you don't have complete HTML or you have no HTML, they may get nothing. So the cool thing about die is that you can also include a string or message as feedback. So you can let people know, okay, I died, but here's why I died, which would be great if we could do this as humans. So I'm going to say connection failed, but I'm going to add on to that using the dot and pointing to the connect error that exists inside of my connection object. Now this is a complete statement, so we end it with a semicolon. So if connect error has a value, this is going to evaluate to true, which will run this code here, which will cause it to die, and it will execute this connection failed, and it will say this is the connect error attached to the connection failed string. Cool. So I'm going to close out my PHP with that, and then I'm going to save it. Now let's see this fail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to misspell my username. I'm going to add 2 Z's in there and then save this. Cool. And so over in my, let's see, let's go back over here to Apache. Let's scroll up and let's run this in a new window. All right. Access denied for ZZ 0 mile. And then here's our die right here. Connection failed, access denied. So the error message already got output to us anyway. And depending on how your PHP server is set up, this may be hidden, and usually it should be hidden. On Cloud 9, it's not, because Cloud 9 is a development space, and so you want to be able to see errors as much as possible and get as much information as to why your code failed. Okay, cool. So I'll come back over here now and I'll fix my error. Save that. Control R, reload the page, and I get nothing. So that means everything went through, which is kind of like, I probably should have a message here, right? Well, let's go ahead and add one in there. So if it doesn't die, the PHP will continue executing, and we can go ahead and echo out this statement here. Connected successfully. Yo. Complete statement. Save. Come back over here. Reload. There it is. It worked. Booyah. Awesome. Cool. All right. So that's the end of this video here. On our next video, we're going to edit this code. Be sure and save this. We're going to edit this code to allow us to actually go in and retrieve and spit out data from that table. All right.